12 global challenges. These are things that every human being on this planet is facing at some way or another. These are the issues that are um, defining our world, while they are each a problem, a significant problem in some cases if you've got a war going on or you don't have enough water. In some way, these are each pointing us to the solution. So in a way, we look at the 12 global challenges as, oh, we've got 12 problems here. But really what we're looking at are 12 fingers pointing all in the same direction at what our solution needs to look like. So what I want to do is go through each one of these relatively quickly. I could spend 2 hours talking about any one of them. We're not going to do that today. But what I want to do is give you an overview, give you a feeling for how profound the issue is. And again, maybe point the way toward how we resolve the issue. One more thing before we get started on going through each one. In our divided politics of in the United States, and I haven't looked at the list to see, I think almost all of us are here in the US, but there are a number of people signed in to get the recording who are in other countries. So here in the US, each of these issues gets skewed through either a left-leaning lens or a right-leaning lens, and we wind up miscommunicating about them because we're missing each other. So what we need to do is start looking at this as looking at these issues as holistic issues, as global issues, that if we articulate them the correct way, that allows left and right to come together and start solving our problems as opposed to making them worse. Okay, so I take a deep breath and we launch ourselves into the 12 global challenges. So the first one is the challenge of security. In terms of looking at this challenge, there are a number of issues plaguing us. We only have to pick up a newspaper to look at the issues of war and violence around the world. Now, some of those wars are what I call deep identity wars. Wars that go way, way beyond a particular nationality or a particular nation state, but go to the core of who we are. We fight over religion. We fight over culture. We fight over language. And those things are, because they're so deep in us, they become almost intractable. We're also seeing the prevalence of non-state wars, where a state has a war with an entity that isn't a state. You can think of Israel and Hezbollah. You can think of a whole bunch of states and ISIS. You can think of lots of different ways that state and non-state wars go on. And because it's a non-state war, it can be fought anywhere, including in the United States. And because it's a non-state war, you can't point your finger at anybody and say, they're the problem, they're the blame. Another issue is what I call techno wars. As the technology to do warfare goes up, the prevalence of the fighting also goes up. The so-called smart bombs that can decide for themselves what a target is, the use of drones and other remote control violence, and another thing is just violence overload. And What we see it in our newspapers, we see it, we think of violence as entertainment. You know, how many explosions are in a particular movie? How many times will the Golden Gate Bridge be destroyed by evil aliens or whatever? This goes on and on and on, and it permeates how we think of ourselves, and it permeates our security, how we think, what we think of as security. The second challenge is the challenge of water. And in terms of water, um, every being, every living being deserves access to fresh, clean, and reasonably abundant water. But the fact that we are toxifying our water, that through global climate change, there are areas that are experiencing deeper and deeper levels of drought, where water can just simply be mismanaged, where there's too much in one spot and not enough in the other. And the privatization of water, where water is being sold to companies who will charge you for the access to that water. And if you don't pay the charge, you don't get access to the water. And in very poor countries and in third world countries, this is a recipe not just for disaster, but it's a recipe for death. In the third challenge, the challenge of food, and yes, those are square watermelons because somebody thought that was a really good idea. The theory being that you can pack more into a truck and therefore sell more if they're square as opposed to round. So the idea of the challenge of water is there's crop loss now, and we're setting ourselves up for massive crop loss as our industrial pesticides and our industrial fertilizers fail, and they are failing, which means you have to use more and more and more of it, and then you get to a failure point. That means our entire food supply is at risk. We're growing lots and lots of corn for fuel, and as opposed to feeding people. And that competition will increase over time. The toxicity of food, the things that we consciously put in our food that are poisons in order to maintain shelf life, in order to just make it look a prettier color. This is going on and is having negative results right now. The mismanagement of food. Here in Oregon, we have hundreds, perhaps even thousands of acres of really good farmland that is being used to grow grass seed, not food that a human being or any other being can eat, but grass seed that we ship over to China so their ever expanding need for new golf courses. We're sending the seed out for that. I happen to think that's a really bad idea. Okay, so but it's being managed by money, and the Chinese have money and they're spending it, and so we're going to grow the grass seed for it. And then the nature of industrial and industrialized agriculture. That we've removed ourselves from the process of growing. We've removed ourselves from the process of living things. We think it's okay to genetically modify a watermelon to make it square. We think it's okay to feed our children poisoned food, and it must be okay for somebody. As long as we're killing ourselves slowly, it's okay. And we need a new vision around that, around food. In terms of our fourth challenge, that's the challenge of energy. And in terms of the energy challenge, we just had an experience, a day or two ago, of the failure of the grid. I think it was in New York City, where they had a blackout that lasted many hours, and somebody pushed the wrong button. Well, there could be lots of wrong buttons being pushed over time, inadvertently or even maliciously as a tool of terrorism. Peak oil is another issue that we've already extracted from the ground all of the easily available oil, and we now have to use very difficult and ever increasingly technological difficult means to get the rest of the oil. Oil shale, fracking, using all of these extremes to get every single drop out of the ground. Al Gore said something that I thought was very powerful. Someone asked him, like, when are we ever going to taper off of oil, or a question like that. And his answer was, drug addicts will look for veins between their toes in order to inject their addictive substances rather than stop their addiction. And right now, things like fracking and oil shales and all of that infrastructure is like looking for the vein between your toes, as opposed to questioning, should we be consuming any of these fossil fuels at all? The mismanagement of energy. Right now, the priority of our society is, if the military needs the energy, they get it, and they get as much as they want, okay? And then corporations, and then human beings. I actually happen to think those priorities should be reversed, but guess what? Nobody asked us. And I want to be clear about that. The Republicans didn't ask us. The Democrats didn't ask us. None of the leaders asked us, because they don't want us involved in the process. They think the process goes along just perfect without us. And as I said before, in terms of food, the competition of energy, of our energy needs and our food needs, are going to run head to head with each other, as it's already done in several different societies. So our next challenge is the challenge of health. And these challenges are relatively obvious. Pandemics. It's only a matter of time before Ebola escapes its containment in Central Africa and rampages around the world. We're not ready for it. If we thought of this as a real issue, we should be sending our best doctors, our best care into Central Africa to make sure this doesn't happen. And what we're going to do instead is ignore it until it gets bad. And then as soon as we recognize it gets bad, it will be impossible to contain. We are facing and creating more and more disease-resistant pathogens. We're creating the superbugs that are not controlled by any chemical means that we've got at our disposal right now. The world has bad healthcare systems. When I was working over in Uganda, I was working with the UN, and first of all, we carried with us a very small pharmacy. We had any drug that you thought you might need over there. We went down to the UN pharmacy in the basement in their offices in Rome, and just loaded everything in. And if we needed a hospital, to go to a hospital, there was an airplane waiting at the airport to airlift us to Germany. We would have never seen the inside of a Ugandan hospital, because the only thing that happens when you walk into a Ugandan hospital is that you walk out with AIDS. And these having situations like this in a world where there is so much, um, we know so much about healthcare, is inexcusable, and overly expensive healthcare. My personal healthcare system and strategy is being able to fly out of this country and get some good healthcare at a fraction of the cost. As soon as you cross the US border, the costs go down by half. As soon as you go into, for example, Asia, the cost may go down to a quarter or even 10% of what we pay here. We think we have the best healthcare system, and we don't. It's really amazing how we can lie to ourselves that way. Challenge number 6, the challenge of politics. This is, as we're going into what I call the silly season, our presidential election season, we get to see how empty our political process is. I've seen the political process in lots and lots of different countries. I've watched the street demonstrations in Venezuela. I've watched General Sisi come to power in Egypt, and I know what our political, we're up against the wall in terms of our politics. The first issue is failed states. Now, a failed state is a state where the people don't have a reasonable voice in their own political reality, their own political future. Now, I think that includes a whole lot of countries. I think it includes this one also. Let me say, on the local level and even on the regional level, I think people have a reasonable say in how their country or how their region is moving forward. But when you get to the national level, the entire process has been bought and paid for by corporations. We know that, and we keep addressing our needs to that system. We need to stop doing that, because it also adds to increased alienation. I feel like I am not a part of this world. I even talk about it as though it's something that's happening over there. A big issue in terms of politics is the inability of government to solve cultural, moral, and spiritual crises. They're not supposed to. We need to have mechanisms in our communities where we together as human beings can talk about our cultural issues, our moral issues, our spiritual issues. We don't anymore, and we need to do something about that. And we see the rise of special interest politics, that if you're not part of a special interest that gets itself embedded in the system in some way, that what will happen is that you don't have a voice at all. So people are out there clamoring to become a special interest, as opposed to looking at the politics of the whole, as opposed to looking at the governance of the whole. How do all of us govern everyone else for the good of the whole? Now, if you start with that question, you're going to wind up with a very, very different spot than if I start with the question of how can I amass my special interest groups to get 51% of the electorate so that I win. This shouldn't be about winning and losing. This really should be about how do all of us come together and govern ourselves and govern each other. The seventh challenge is economics, and you can see this guy is not having a good day. The challenge of economics includes the collapse of financial markets, and we've seen them happen all around the world. The collapse of monetary and banking systems, we've seen that happen all around the world. we see expanding poverty that expands at the same rate of the expansion of greed and hoarding and corruption. So all of these things are part of the same system. And what we need to do is unwind that system. By red market economics, and see if I can do this in like 2 seconds. I talk about economics in 5 different ways. There is the black market, and that is a market that is illegal and immoral. You start thinking about, for example, heroin sales or methamphetamine sales, where it not only is something that's illegal, it's something that hurts the society. The second market is the gray market. The gray market is largely illegal, but it's not immoral. For example, somebody who fixes car motors on the side and doesn't have a license to do so. Well, if they're doing a good job, so what? Another example is a person who makes a little extra money taking care of other people's children. Well, in this state, you've got to be licensed to do so. Well, they're taking care of their own children and doing a good job. I think we can assume that they're going to take care of somebody else's children at least adequately. So gray market is, it may be illegal, but it may not be immoral or damaging to the society. It may actually be beneficial to the society. The green market is something that is really healthy and healing for society. A farmer who's growing organic fruits and vegetables. Someone who is making and selling solar collectors or creating gray water systems. This is something that's helping to heal our planet. The white market is basically benign. It's neither harmful or helpful. It's where most of us do our shopping. And then there's the red market. The red market is hyperactive. It is making trillions and trillions of dollars. It is hyper legal. It's very, very legal because they own the legal system, but it's highly immoral. It's the stuff that you see every day in the Wall Street news. And that leads to the last matter, which is global corporatism. We no longer have a capitalist system. And if you want me to go for a couple of hours on that, I can. I call this global corporatism. It doesn't like markets, it hates markets. It doesn't, it uses consumers, it doesn't service consumers. The only thing that it likes is ever increasing profits for itself, and everything else suffers. In terms of the next challenge, the challenge of education, you have a situation where there may be no education systems at all, or inadequate education. And I've been in schools around the world. I've been in one-room schools where there are 100 children trying to learn, divided into 6 or 7 different groups, with the students facing in different directions depending on what age group you're in, and some amazingly dedicated, amazingly overworked, and amazingly underpaid people, teachers, who are trying to impart an education to them. We have education without values and without vision. For most of us, you can't tell me what the education system is for. What are we trying to do? What are our societal goals that we're trying to accomplish? Back in my day, the purpose of education was to prepare you to be a cog in the industrial machine. Well, that industrial machine is sitting in Mexico or sitting in India or sitting in China. What is this system preparing us to do and to be? We also have an overly bureaucratic education where you teach to the lesson plan, you teach to the next test you're going to give. You're not teaching for that young person to actually know anything about themselves, and to have the ability to do anything about that. And the loss of rational capacity, more and more on the internet, I am seeing people who don't know how to make or respond to a rational argument. They don't know how to respond to each other. They don't know how to even think themselves out of a wet paper bag. And in some ways, because they can group themselves together now, they're kind of proud of it. It's like, yeah, I'm ignorant and I'm proud. And for those of you who have paid any attention to the flat Earth argument, you know what I mean. Anybody who can think, who can look up and think, can figure out that it's round. Okay, but if your rational capacity has been damaged, has been impaired, then you're not going to be able to do that. So the challenge number 9 is our habitat. I've seen housing like this. I'm thinking in particular in Hong Kong, but there's lots of places in the world where you live in a cubicle. And this other image is the low tech version of those high-rise apartments. These guys basically live in cages, okay? And this is, I think it was in Malaysia, but I'm not sure. So our issue is habitat, and I'm saying that in terms of being more than an issue of housing. You know, in this society, in the United States, our homelessness issue is at an epidemic level. But I would suggest to you that that's only a part of the problem. Over-urbanization is another part of the problem. Our cities are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, swallowing up more and more and more resources that are becoming more and more toxic to the environment and toxic to the human spirit. Where we have, as I said, non-existent or inappropriate housing. And inappropriate housing in both directions. You don't have enough housing, or you have way, way too much housing. You know, one person or a couple with 40,000 square feet of housing. It's like, okay, how many families are you going to put in there with you? We also live in a city, in structures, in habitats that isolate ourselves from each other. How many people talk about being alone and lonely while living in the heart of a city, living in such a situation where you can't talk to your neighbors, where you can't connect with each other, and thinking about cities as land pollution. When you just look at a city, and on this one, my city, Portland, Oregon, is an exception. Because when you look at it from the air, it looks very green. We have lots of trees. But for most cities, especially the core of the city, it looks like it looks gray. It looks dead, and that's because it is dead. There's not life there, and so cities are an example of land pollution. We have water pollution, air pollution. Well, the land pollution is called the city. Our 10th challenge is the ecology, and you see how far back in the stack I put it. I did this on purpose. Our ecological issues are very, very important, but we have to get over the notion that it is the only importance. Global climate change is crucially important. Environmental degradation, not just for humans, but for all living beings, is crucially important. And another thing that's really important is the concept of overshoot and dieback. And I do a half-hour talk on this. Basically, when an organism consumes more than its share of a given local environment, it dies. It dies back suddenly, it dies back catastrophically, and the earth then regenerates itself, and that population might come back, but at much, much diminished numbers. A number of our scientists have said that we have already entered the period of overshoot and dieback. And the curve on overshoot, when an organism is about to go into overshoot, it greatly exceeds its carrying capacity, and we're in this bell curve right now. I'm sorry, the hockey stick curve right now. And when it dies back, it dies back. James Lovelock said that of the 7 billion of us on the planet, 100 years from now, there's only going to be like 200 million people living. Okay, that means a catastrophic loss. And we may not be able to survive as a coherent species that's in contact with each other around the world. Now, my job is to make Lovelock wrong. I believe that's your job also. But whether or not you are involved with that is your choice. I'm choosing for life, and I'm choosing that we can be smart enough to back up from the brink of catastrophe on our own. Our 11th challenge is the media. And this challenge is whoops, too far, is information overload. We've got too much information coming in from too many sources. Information distortion, that includes lying, that includes what the modern version of that we're calling fake news, to the point, and this is true around the world, that people are saying, we don't know what's going on in our own society. We don't know what's going on in our own environment, and so we need to know that. Trivialization and saturation. How many times you look at the news and it's just the next murder, it's just the next sex scandal, it's just the next, what is Kim Kardashian wearing today? And we begin to think, because the media is telling us this stuff, that this stuff is important. And an over dependence on high-tech communications. I'm as guilty as anyone else of using these devices for information, but I also use my 2 eyes. And I also will get on an airplane and go to where the action is, so I can see for myself what's actually happened, and not rely on a media telling me something is going on when it's not, or telling me something is not going on when it is. And our final challenge is our spiritual and cultural challenges. This is, needless to say, very important. And as for those of you who may be new to dealing with Commonway, by spiritual, I am not saying religious. I don't see that the two are necessarily joined, okay? By spiritual, I'm talking about suicide and suicidal societies. Many of you have seen the exercise that I did during my TEDx talk. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it, and we'll get you a link for the TEDx talk. We are in a society that has moral degeneration. If I think that me as an individual is the most important element of our society, more important than society as a whole, I'm going to start acting in ways that are helpful for me and very unhelpful for everybody else in the society. We also have a problem with values degeneration. Our values are not, are not clear. We also don't have a collective sense of values anymore. What we need to do is start looking at what are the things that bind us together as human beings in this society, not just Americans, okay, but as or whatever your nationality is, but what binds you together as human beings, and what binds you to all other beings as part of a living and breathing earth. Our lack of vision, and I've seen a bunch of folks try to do a political revival of the American dream. You know, the chicken in every pot, and the hard work, and having a good job and things like that. That is a train that left the station a long time ago. We're being called forth to a new value, a value that's more than becoming a cog in the industrial machine. That new value is simply waiting for us to start articulating it. And through the butterfly projects, through the Imaginal Cafe, we're going to start the process of articulating to ourselves in our own hearts, then to each other, and then to all what that value is. And in the process of doing that, we're going to gain a sense of belonging, that there's something bigger than ourselves that we belong to. I remember some years ago, I was talking to a person about the work of Commonway and about how we were poising ourselves for a future that works for all. And this woman says, I'm going to join you, but I'm not going to see this future that you're talking about. She says, I'm 95 years old. I'm not doing this for selfish reasons. I'm not doing this so that I can see the end result. I'm doing this for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. And that's the kind of thinking, and that's the kind of being that we need on our planet right now. That's the place where we need to be so that we can see where we're going. Okay, so we've come to the end of the 12 global challenges, but we've got one more challenge facing us. We've got the 13th challenge. And the 13th challenge is all this stuff happens at once. We don't get to fix climate change, and everything else is going to stay exactly where it is until we get around to it. And then we'll fix the media, and then all of these things are happening and will happen all at the same time. And that's the place that we need to be thoughtful, and that's the place where we need to be focused.